Hello and welcome to the Killing Time with Arch podcast. I'm Arch Grieve, aka Gem City Dudist Priest on TikTok, and this is the show where I talk to your favorite and soon to be new favorite TikTok creators. My guest today is a fellow bipolar TikTok creator who I think has one of the funniest and realest accounts around about bipolar disorder. She talks about all the funny and cringy and scary things about bipolar disorder and shares some great insights about living with it, all while educating her audience and helping eliminate the stigma around the illness. Her name is Veronica, and she goes by at Bipolar Betch on TikTok. And my interview with her is coming up in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on and talking with me today.
Hi, Arch. It's so nice to be here and a pleasure to join you on your podcast. I'm excited to talk to the viewers and dive into the ups and downs, literally, of bipolar.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate it. I just start off by saying I'm a huge fan of your account. I love it, like I mentioned in the intro, and obviously you're well known on TikTok for the bipolar content that you do, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before that, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the fact that I learned in talking with you before the show that you actually grew up, at least for a little while, in my hometown here in Dayton, in Ohio. So I'm just curious, what do you remember about, growing up here in Ohio, however briefly that was, and any memories stick out to you?
Definitely. So back in Dayton, Ohio, I lived in Bellbrook, which was a small little maple sugar town. They have the little festival every spring for maple tapping and all that good stuff. So my fondest memories are biking around my neighborhood and performing at the Town Hall Theater in Centerville.
Oh yeah,
Um,
okay.
it was my blossoming point. I remember just auditioning for my first show there after I took acting courses when I was in fourth grade. And my friend came up to me in class the next day at school and goes, you got the lead, right? And I was like, I didn't even check the cast list yet. But this was the first theater that gave me a chance, saw potential in me, and gave me an opportunity, really boosted my confidence. So I have Ohio to thank for sparking that dream of acting.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear. And yeah, Bellbrook, I grew up in Xenia, so very close to Bellbrook. I got some friends that live over there, so not far at all. Well, I guess getting into more some of the content, the kind of stuff that we both post about. I know that, we're both type 1 bipolar, and listening to your story, it sounds like you went through a lot of stress like leading up to your first kind of maybe severe manic episode. And I think that I heard you say that it was like 10 months long or something crazy like that. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe what some of the triggers were that kind of ended up spiraling you into mania, and then maybe like how did you get help for that initially?
Yeah, so the triggers that spiraled me into mania and how I got help, that is a complicated question because there are a multi-layered set of circumstances and scenarios that fell into place. And what I like to use as an analogy is a set of dominoes. And for example, like when the dominoes fall in the circle, it doesn't make sense about like what the shape or the pattern of the dominoes is until they've all fallen. For me, the pieces didn't fall into place until all the dominoes fell. And when they fell and felt like actually aligned into place, the realization and clarity was bipolar. So these dominoes that fell were a set of really traumatic changes in my life that caused triggering responses and inappropriate responses from me that were elicited by these triggering moments. So for example, um it was the pandemic, which I think goes without saying for everyone that that was a triggering time, just being locked down and living in fear. So
Hmm.
there was that. But before that, I had been broken up with, cheated on actually, and I didn't know I was cheated on at the time. It was just confusing to me why it was such a sudden breakup. And I
Hmm.
internalized that that severance and made it all about me, in the sense that like I wasn't good enough, I wasn't perfect, I clearly wasn't meant to be with this person, and I had horrible judgment, poor decision making, and I brought me into this spiral of like disillusionment and or dissolution, I guess, where I lost sense of responsibility and became this impulsive monster where I really yearned to not be sober. So I did a lot of drugs, I drank a lot, I slept around with a lot of people I shouldn't have slept around with for money at times, sometimes just for fun. And it diluted my sense of self because I started to see myself as an object instead of as a human being that deserved and had, through anything she'd been through, owed it to herself to be forgiving. And I wasn't. So this, for a time frame for it, you mentioned the 10 months. Yes, it was 10 months because it began in December of 2019 and ended in October of 2020.
Well,
I had about like a 6 month stable period in between where I wasn't too active, but that's because we were in lockdown. So like I couldn't really spend money. I couldn't really work. I was still in college, so I was just doing classes and doing my best to um keep up with my coursework. But when classes resumed in the fall, that's when all hell broke loose because the layers of circumstances that happened in my life that triggered this episode just kept stacking.
mhm,
So I already covered the breakup, I already covered the pandemic. What was actually occurring throughout all of my college life was sexual harassment from a professor
mhm,
who, in the drama department, this professor actually, without going into too much detail, just harassed me in inappropriate manners that caused me to lose myself. And I ultimately reported this individual to Title IX, got them fired from the university, but that caused a lot of dissonance in my mind where I was like, oh, I shouldn't have turned him in. It really wasn't that bad. Or no, it was bad. You were being manipulated and used. um, you need to turn this individual in. So there's that. And then my mom and grandmother were both diagnosed with um, different types of cancer, but definitely not the stages of cancer you'd ever want cancer, but not the stages of cancer you'd hope for when they were
sure.
diagnosed. So there was that. And school was starting with all this in mind.
Right.
So I'm going into the semester with a boyfriend that I started dating over the summer over like online because I was so bored. I was so bored and so like sexually starved that I desperately started dating someone. It was basically an illegitimate relationship because I was severely unhealthy, undiagnosed, and unmedicated for bipolar at the time.
Mhm,
And the mania really, really spiraled the day I cheated on this person. I
mhm.
cheated on this person. Um, I mean, uh, I know you probably have a lot of questions, and I've been talking a long time. I can go into the story of like the spiral now if you
Yeah,
would prefer.
sure. No, that'd be great. Yeah, actually, no, I appreciate just that's part of what I love your account for is just the candor and everything. So yeah, I would definitely like to hear that story.
Bet. So yeah, the spiral began the day I cheated on this individual, and I hiked a mountain that morning,
Nice.
which I think is so like climactic and symbolic of like, oh, I started the journey by climbing a mountain and then everything went downhill from there because I literally had to come down the mountain in order for my life to proceed.
Right.
So everything came downhill from that moment. I hiked this peak by my university with a few friends and then proceeded to go back to my dorm. I was a resident advisor at the time.
Nice.
And that just goes to show like, never mind. I the level of me being delusional and how much the university trusted me to still watch first year students, I think is beyond me. But
Hmm.
um, nevertheless, I this individual I was dating left when I was hiking because they had to go back to their university. So I decided I was going to wear lingerie and invite a friend over and cheat on this partner, this illegitimate partner, if you will.
I just want to
I
stop and say I love how premeditated that was, the wear the lingerie beforehand, which I think, hopefully we'll talk more about. A lot of people I don't think understand about bipolar and what it does to your, judgment and everything when you're manic in particular. So, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
I mean, you're so right. Like when you are manic, you make these decisions that you'd never make, and yet they make so much sense in your mind because you've lined everything up to be in such an order and to go as planned when you're manic. And it never goes as planned because you're actually like losing your mind and people influence or at least step intervene at points to mitigate the damage. But to continue with my story, essentially what unfolded that next entire week was a series of things. My brain almost snapped. Coming down that mountain and cheating on this individual gave me a sense of freedom that I felt like I'd never had. And it was like all inhibitions had been yanked like a plug. And
Mhm.
the drain of the bathroom or the bathtub just started flooding into the sink and like down the drain. And like it was just, I'm very metaphorical today. I don't know what's going on.
I love the
Um,
metaphors, the mountains and the drains. It is great. It helps a lot.
but the plug was yanked from the drain and everything was just it ran out. Like my inhibitions ran out, my sense of self-control ran out, my dedication to like things that were quote unquote right, like my coursework, my work that I had like a job after school, like none of it came to my mind because everything was so important outside of my responsibilities. For example, I
Sure.
founded a sticker company and invited um friends over for an orgy to look at the stickers with me while we were engaging in sexual acts, neither of which they actually entertained. Um, and I'm
I mean, they
glad
say
that
sex
they didn't.
sells, so that's brilliant.
Um, so sticker company orgy, we did I ordered upwards of $6,000 worth of camping gear, corsets, and like melting wax for special envelopes on Amazon. Um,
Nice.
and where did that money come, you may ask? I laundered $30,000 from an individual who claimed to be a Bitcoin investor on Instagram. They reached out to me and said, "Hey, we noticed you've been advertising this sticker company. We'd really like to support your venture." And I said, "Bet, bet, bet. What do I need to do?" And they said, "We will send you money and you send back a snippet of it." And I said, "And I keep the remainder?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Perfect." That is laundering, folks. And you should not do that. Especially when it involves multiple platforms. So like they were sending me checks, and I had to either Venmo or Zelle it to random people.
Hmm.
Um, so this money came in piecemeal, but ultimately what I ended up with in my bank account was $15,000 in total. So 6,000 of that went to Amazon. The other 9,000 of it was reserved for shoes and clothing and um a cat tree. And oh yeah, I had a cat too as a resident advisor, which was a whole other decision that I made when I was manic. Luckily the cat is still alive. I still have her. She's roaming
Aw,
around somewhere.
that's great.
But she's been through a lot and we've been through a lot together. But nevertheless, that week ultimately culminated in my friends noticing my odd behavior and saying, Veronica, this is really abnormal. We think you should speak with your therapist. So I did, and my therapist immediately noticed something was up. But she suggested and referred me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, I think you might have what we're seeing as like some sort of ADHD. We need you to come into the hospital to get a prescription and get evaluated and all this. So I don't know if that was actually true or if she was just saying that to get me to come to the hospital.
Right.
But I I was voluntarily admitted, um, is what they called it, because I brought myself to the hospital and they evaluated me and brought me to the psychiatric wing because that's where I belong.
Right.
And I was there for all of 2 days before I lied my way out. I told the doctors that I had actually booked an interview with Instagram in New York City because I was a business major, which was true. I was a business major, but I did not have interviews lined up with Instagram. Um, and I
Nice.
said I had to be in New York City in 2 days, and they just didn't understand. And they were like, okay, well, if you can line out your story to this counselor and they believe you, then you're free to be let go. And I was like, bet. And me being an actress, I was like, I just need to be in the zone and like give the performance of my life.
Right.
I did. And I
Nice.
escaped.
Clearly you did. Yeah.
But I that prevented me from getting the help I needed still because it wasn't until a few days after when I had spent some more money, bought like breakfast for my entire dorm. Basically, I um was caught by my bank for the fraudulent check deposits, and on top of that, I I just I called people like friends and burned bridges that shouldn't have been burned for no damn reason. So if I had stayed in the hospital and let them give me a diagnosis, it wouldn't have been days after when I was still causing distraction that my psychiatrist called me and gave me the word.
Right.
Um, from there, so with my friends having essentially turned me in and my psychiatrist luring me to the hospital, um, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 1 on October 9th of 2020, and they prescribed me with mood stabilizers and an antipsychotic, took me off of what I was previously on, which was Lexapro.
Nice.
And that shit is known to induce mania.
Right. Of
So
course.
as soon as I heard that, I was like, so I probably could have come out of this unscathed without the Lexapro. Probably not. And the reason being is that bipolar is genetic for me, and it was triggered or catalyzed by those traumatic triggering events that happened all at once.
Right.
So the sexual harassment, the mom and grandmother cancer, the breakup, the pandemic, and all that, it all happening within a couple month span just catapulted me into this unforgivable mania.
Yeah, well, it's crazy to hear. Um, I mean, to probably people listening who don't have bipolar disorder, that's all probably crazy to hear. To me, what's crazy to hear is the similarities in just like our stories and almost every bipolar person I meet. Like, it seems like we all have very similar stories about, you know whether it's the pandemic, which I wasn't. I was diagnosed once in a very like stressful period of my life over 10 years ago, and I like went to the hospital and got out. I lied. Also, I think I got an attorney somehow because I wasn't like voluntarily put in there, and so I had like called the attorney's office for that the state provides, and got like a state appointed attorney to like come and like get me out of there, and um, you know, just denied my diagnosis for years, and then finally, like during the pandemic, it happened again, but it was like in a totally not stressful time in my life. And so I was finally like, okay, well, they told me, I had a 50-50 chance of being bipolar, like it might be that it was just a stress-induced episode of psychosis. But I chose to believe that for like 8 years and then finally kind of confronted with the reality during the pandemic too. But the cheating, the inhibitions, the cats even, and the masking and all that, I mean, just all very similar stories that I could share too. So I just think that's interesting that have you found that to be the case when you meet other people who are bipolar, that they have similar stories?
100%. I mean, every time I reconvene or hear another bipolar individual story, like what you just said, how you relate to the cheating and the inhibition loss and all this, it's repeatedly the impulsivity is what I hear. And it's
Mhm.
like just this sense of disillusionment where your previous self is gone and someone else takes over.
Right,
And it feels like uncontrollable because it is.
right,
And at the same time, you are somewhat like lucid throughout it. So it's like a dream state, but simultaneously you're you're controlling your body, but it feels like an out of body experience almost because you're making these decisions. It's just like instant regret when you come to or wake up out of the mania.
right. Well, that's like when they talk about the whole feelings of grandeur and stuff. I mean, it's almost like you feel almost godlike. I feel like sometimes, like consequences don't matter. I'll figure out a way around them. Like, and for me at least, a lot of times I just kind of, um, you know, just basically imagine a world where there are no consequences, and that's the world I live in, and I'll figure out some way to get out of them. If they catch up to me, is kind of my mindset when I'm manic like that, at least. So, but I know you've shared some funny stories about being manic, and I think we have to either kind of laugh or cry sometimes looking back. And so one story that makes me laugh a lot though is when you talk about texting all of your ex-lovers in a group chat. And so I would love to hear more about the rationale, how it went, and all that kind of stuff, I guess.
Definitely. So one night in this mania, one of the events that transpired was I thought it would be a great idea to put 30 some odd number of people that I've ever kissed, loved, liked, looked at, and thought was cute, and I have their number.
Nice.
Um, anyone, and put them in this group chat. So, mind you, all of them had to have iPhones because I wanted to FaceTime them and make a
Poor.
group FaceTime. So I added them all, texted, guess who? And then no one responded. So then I texted, guess what you have in common?
Nice.
Suddenly, I just start seeing flies drop. Like X and X left the conversation. X and X left. And it was then that I knew I had to take my chance and just bite the bullet. So I FaceTimed the whole group, and two people picked up and they were like, "Who the fuck are you?" Like, "Oh, Veronica?" What? And I was like, I don't even remember what I said. I just remember that the FaceTime was very abbreviated, and it ended with the group chat dissolving. No one was left in the group chat. It was me and me alone. So I
Nice.
burned all those bridges, and they were good connections. They were people that I've, even if I'd never like dated, liked them, or like loved them, and I just had like a crush on them, they were still like people that I would have loved to have stayed in touch with for networking connections and stuff like that.
Sure.
Um, but perhaps all for the better.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw a keychain in the store the other day that said "May the bridges I burn light the way," and I liked that motto a little bit. So, but yeah, I do kind of I get in kind of a just like burn it all down or let's see what the fuck happens mode when I am manic. So, I guess the two just to control that, maybe talk about that side of things for a little bit. It took me a while at least to find the right drug cocktail, I suppose, that works for me. And as we sit here smoking, I'm curious, a lot of people don't really understand, I think, how difficult it can be to find, the right drug cocktail that works and you can tolerate the side effects of. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about what that journey has looked like for you, I guess.
Well, here I am packing a bowl and
Nice.
simultaneously on six different medications. Um,
Hmm.
I have my medical card for marijuana, but that is primarily for my experiences with OCD and CPTSD to
Mm-hmm.
mitigate traumatic responses to social anxiety. So I find that when I self-medicate with cannabis, I can just blend in more and relax with the crowds instead of feeling so on edge. But more to the point of the pharmaceutical drugs that I take, I am on a mood stabilizer called lamotrigine. I'm on an antipsychotic called Abilify. And then I'm on two anxiety medications, one called Buspar and one called propranolol. And then I'm on a focus medication to help mitigate the thoughts towards non-threatening stimuli, and it's called Strattera.
Okay. Well, no, and thank you for sharing that because I'm on multiple as well, but for bipolar, I take lithium actually. I take it twice a day, like higher dose in the morning and then a lower dose at night. And then I'm also on a antidepressant, which I know is controversial because, sometimes it can tend to ramp people up into mania. So I kind of try to watch that, but then I also have olanzapine for when my mania symptoms get really bad, and then propranolol as well. And then for me, I think weed helps on both ends really, because when I'm manic, I can't stop my mind from like the next thought, like I can't slow down the racing thoughts. And weed is like one of the few things that does that for me and isn't like, actually harmful and can actually help. And then, with the depression side, I often have anxiety and depression, obviously, and so I find it helps a lot with both of those too. So that's kind of my mix that seems to work for me. But I'm curious about Abilify because I was on that for like a year before I realized it was causing my depression. And so has it worked well for you? Have you been on it for a while?
It was causing your depression. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I guess for some people just the way it reacts can just actually have like I mean I my mood was stable the whole year, but I was just stably depressed the entire time and I was like I didn't know what was causing it or I actually like quit a really good job that I had as a mediator working for the city here in Dayton, and just because like I tend to quit jobs when I'm depressed, and I was really depressed then. So I think if I was not on Abilify, I'd probably still be a mediator today, and but that's just what happened. So, but I it didn't work well for me. But weed has. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I we were talking before we started recording about how my current position makes me feel a little like under recognized in addition to feeling just irritable and sometimes frustrated with minor bits and pieces.
right,
And I feel like what you just mentioned about Abilify being like this stable but depressed state, that for me is in my irritability, like my depressed thoughts, my stagnancy and feelings of being stuck in like the past manifest in manifest in irritability 100%,
Mhm.
and it makes me like short with people. It makes me like quick to judge myself and hesitant to dive into projects because I don't believe that I'm good enough, so I just watch TV.
Right.
um but I'm curious now what you've just described with Abilify, because I've noticed since I was on Abilify, like I just feel kind of stuck and numb,
Yeah.
and it's not gone away. But I need to bring that up with my psychiatrist. I That's a really good point.
Yeah, for sure. Because somebody actually, there's another creator on here. I don't know if you've seen the BP spouse, the bipolar spouse, or not, but she's really cool, and she is a spouse of a person with bipolar disorder type 1, and I know him actually. He's a cool guy, and I like he's not really on TikTok the way she is, but she has a really cool account where she educates people, and I've had her actually on the show, but. Um, where was I going with that? So she was talking about, um, just living with bipolar and how, difficult that is to like keep jobs and stuff. And so I don't know, that's something that I've struggled with a lot over the years. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with kind of that irritability. But she was the one that mentioned the Abilify thing. And when I talked to my psychiatrist, they said, we'll try something different. And it hasn't really come back for me. So I'm I kind of feel like that's what was causing it, but you know, whatever
So
route.
so you're on you said lithium, but that's more of a mood stabilizer. What do you take to mitigate the psychotic tendencies?
I take olanzapine for that, but only like as needed. So if I start to get more manic, then I'll start taking that. But it's only like 5 milligrams or something, which I think you can do up to 20 maybe. So, but that usually helps stop me from like ramping up into actual mania. So, but I only take it like when I
I
need to. Sorry.
No, I really like that, and I thank you for sharing your medications because that's really helpful. I I will do my own research for sure and then be prepared with my psychiatrist to just hit the books, because this has been an ongoing issue and I haven't been able to pinpoint it. And initially I thought it was I brought down my Abilify from 30 milligrams to 20 milligrams because it was making me gain so much weight. And um now I've noticed that since then I'm less. I don't know. I'm still on Abilify, so who knows?
Well, no, when you were, that's what I was trying to say was, or I forgot to say was that Laura, the bipolar spouse, she reminded me that when her husband was on it, she said he was like just a cardboard cutout version of himself, basically, and that's like how I kind of felt when I was like that kind of resonated with me. So, um, But yeah, I just kind of feel like, or I felt like at the time that, you know, I wasn't good enough and I didn't deserve the job and I was holding everybody back. And really, I was just like, I had been doing too much for too long and, like was overstretched. And like, I was working on like $120,000 State Department grant at the same time as managing like multiple different programs for this mediation center and doing their website stuff and social media and all that. So I feel like a lot of times there's this tendency where we can like overcommit when we're manic and, make everyone kind of um think we're capable of like doing everything all at once, but then like when our mood comes back down or we get depressed, then like shit hits the fan because I just, can't keep up at that point.
You were saying how um Laura, the BP spouse, um she attested that her is it her husband or boyfriend or something?
Her husband, yeah.
Husband. Oh, BP spouse, duh. Um um her husband is like a cardboard cutout version of himself. I couldn't relate to that more.
No.
Like this is this is becoming the more we're discussing, it is becoming a pertinent problem that I need to surface with my psychiatrist. So I'm making an appointment when I get out of this call.
No, I hope that that helps because I was really glad when I because I mean it was like a whole year that I was just fucking like I don't know what's the problem, but it's probably me. And so yeah, it's been nice not having that feeling all the time at work in particular. But that brings up a good point though, which I think is that I have a support group that I've tried to start, and I'm not consistent yet. I'm working on it. Like part of the problem is that it depends on me being consistent, but I'm working on getting better and have some friends that have kind of been coming to that. But that's one thing I found is that having like a support group just of people just like we're doing now, talking about living with bipolar and like talking about the drugs that we're on and the, like how work and everything and like what all that's like. I find that really helpful. So I'm curious, like, what supports you put in place in addition to drugs, I guess, that, you might be willing to share or talk about.
That is a really good question. So additional supports I have in place are I have a support network on Discord called the Bipolar Bond Book. And in the Bipolar Bond Book, we meet twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and we just vibe, like literally an hour of just talking anything that's on our mind about bipolar. And it helps us get out like frustrations about society, stigmas, and like people's silence around mental health. And
Right.
it's been very powerful to hear as someone who one of my other supports is content creation because it's a creative outlet for me. But in that, it can become lonely. So hearing from people that are similar to me, or even meeting with people like you, Arch, like hearing how your stories parallel mine, it makes me feel like so much less alone in the content I'm making.
Right.
So there's those two, but then secondarily, my care team, so my psychiatrist, my therapist, and then my personal influences, so my boyfriend and my roommate, who's my sister. Um, so I have
Nice.
several different levels of support. Very grateful for them all. And the really I think the big thing that I need to get in alignment right now is my medication like regimen because the Abilify is not cutting it. And I've noticed it's taken an effect on me and I couldn't pinpoint it. But um it is that, and it's also that recently my therapist identified borderline traits on top of my bipolar type 1 disorder.
Hmm.
So I've been grappling with the recognition of borderline within myself. And just to touch on that real quick, what is that and why does it sound so scary?
Yeah, please
um
do.
it's ridiculously scary, but the reason it's scary is because people hear about like serial killers who are borderline and all this, when really all it means is that you were traumatized as a kid. That's all it
Yeah.
means. And it means that you developed coping mechanisms that aren't healthy. And that can be any spectrum of coping mechanism. So all it means for me is that I internalized all of the belittling and degrading and emotional abuse that I endured as a child. And I cope with it by lashing out at people, being irritable. And when I don't get my way, I get very frustrated, like extremely frustrated. And I've noticed that in myself, borderline has manifested primarily in minor inconvenience reactions. So anytime like something very, very minor occurs, I like insert any like, oh, a straw fell when you went to open up your to-go takeout, or you dropped the pizza when you're taking it out of the oven, or your cat just scratched you, or someone canceled on a friend like meetup and that was just the last straw. Like stuff like that, that's very minor, that doesn't affect you or will affect you long term. It gets on my nerves because I feel threatened by it. And that is just another layer on top of my bipolar that makes the episodes so much more difficult to identify because they are surrounded by this bubble of irritability. And
Mhm.
it's difficult to know, like, oh, is she cocky manic, or is she depressed and insecure? Like
Right.
it can manifest in many different ways.
Which that reminds me, I want to ask you about because I talk about in my book about how I have a conversation with my therapist, and I'm like asking her like, is this okay for me to be pissed about basically? Because like it was how some friends treated me, and she was like, yeah, and I was like, okay, because I wasn't sure if it was just like my bipolar or my legit outrage at what they had done, or some combination, and she was like, well, bipolar people have a hard time distinguishing between those because like your emotions are all over the place so often that you can't really trust where your judgment's coming from a lot of times. And so I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate, I would say. So I talk in the book about how it bugs me sometimes though, like when I go to the therapist and I tell them I'm bipolar, and they say, you're not bipolar, you're a person who has bipolar. And that always kind of has bugged me. I don't know if I just feel like it's a little bit ableist in a way because it's like, I'm always bipolar. I might be at one end of the spectrum or another, but like, there's never not a time where I'm, you know, bipolar. So I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on, like, are you bipolar or are you a person who has bipolar?
I am a person who has bipolar because bipolar does not define who I am, and it does not represent me. It is not the package that I come in. It is a label on the package that I come in.
Mhm.
And the package that I come in shouldn't even be a package. It should be an amorphous blob that can anamorph and shapeshift and become whatever it wants, because I am one of the most resilient and adaptable and just transformational individuals I've ever met. And I say that because I have to be my own cheerleader, and sometimes no one else is. And I really do feel like I've earned my spot in the content creation with mental health in the scope of just being honest and vulnerable and putting stories out there that help people feel less alone and feel heard and seen. And in that, there's so much power in helping people find and rediscover who they are. It's just a matter of me discovering who I am. So back to like this whole thing of content creation and is bipolar me or do I have bipolar? People put me in a box. People are like, "Oh, she's this bipolar content creator. Like, what does she even do like outside of content creation?"
Right.
Like, you don't see, not you, but like the plural you
Right.
doesn't see anything outside of videos that are 10 minutes of my day.
Right.
10 minutes of my day. And that is a sliver of what I endure. I'm putting on a show every time I make a video. Like, it's not, sometimes I cry, and that is, even that is a show. Like, oh, does the tear like fall in the right place? Like,
Right.
literally, because sometimes I just need to, I use my platform as a creative outlet while also utilizing it to get the good word out about the truth of mental health. And the truth of it is that it's not fucking gritty. It's disgusting. It's like actually heartbreaking and gut wrenching. You will lose friends. You will lose family members. Um, you will lose face with people. And the even sadder reality is the loss of these individuals through like suicidality and all that.
Right.
Or the loss of yourself. And what I struggle with the most is when I'm depressed, or even right now, like I was talking with my therapist the other day and I was like, if X and X were layered on top of my plate right now, I don't even know if I'd want to live. And she was like, we need to unpack that.
Right.
And we did. And what the unpacking unfolded was that when I'm like, when I'm stuck in the past and I can't like think my way out of these tough situations or these feelings of permanence, I don't have the ability to recognize the temporary. Like everything that is happening is always temporary. And what gets me about suicidality is that um people just don't want others to feel their own pain. So they hide and they shrivel away because they feel like a burden.
Right.
And I know as someone who has struggled with suicidal thoughts myself, um, there comes times when you don't feel worthy to even step on the ground you're wearing shoes upon because you feel like such a disgusting human being.
Right.
And that is a place that is so real for a lot of mentally ill individuals every day. And
Right.
these people go to work. These people have families. These people have kids. These people these people are your friends. And the fact that a lot of people just stay quiet, or it's a stigmatized subject in the sense of in the sense of like, oh, that's depressing, like please don't bring that up right now. Like, no, we would talk about a physical ailment in the same, if not more glorified light. Why can't we talk about the organ that controls your entire body?
Right. Exactly.
It it doesn't make sense to me sometimes.
I no, I couldn't agree more. It's kind of like I feel like in a lot of ways my life is in a really, much better place than it was a few years ago. But like in the area of friendships, like there's a lot that did not survive the pandemic, plus kind of like what happened in the aftermath of my like, bipolar like diagnosis and finally accepting it and everything. And so, there's places I can't work and places I can't volunteer anymore. And like a lot of it stems from just people not being willing to deal with um, like having someone who's bipolar, like in kind of like important decision making places. And I feel like that's, I think it's bullshit. I think we make accommodations for other disabilities. I think you put safeguards in place, and I talk about that a lot in my book about, kind of like what I've done to try to make sure that, I'm not going to spend a shit ton of money if I'm manic and, make stupid impulsive decisions. And, but like you can put those accommodations in place, it's not like super hard. And, but I think part of the problem is that, like you said, like a lot of us are just such great maskers that, people have no clue what's going on in our lives, underneath the surface. And so, that might make it difficult too. I don't know. But
And it's like a generational um hurdle as well, because I feel like, at least for my parents who are Gen X, this is such a hush hush subject that, like, bringing it up is a sign of weakness.
hmm
And even crying or showing like heightened emotion is seen as like delusional.
right.
And it harkens back to a time when what it stems down to is the honestly, I think it's a lack of equality between like feminism and like very, very pro-patriarchal societal values,
Right.
like minimizing emotion,
hmm
minimizing the sense of the heart and the sense of feeling in any decision making. And that is typically associated with more feminine qualities. And it feels as if this patriarchal like umbrella is constantly trying to close on this emotional like wind that's lifting up the umbrella when they view it as rain, and it's not rain. It's more like a support, the individual that is holding up the umbrella. And I am with the metaphors again. um but essentially it's fascinating exactly um how the feminine qualities of like emotion, feeling, empathy, and leaning into the fact that I have to even say that they're feminine qualities is, or the fact that I'm saying that is um just like societal judgment in general, because we view like motherhood and like the caring of children as something that a woman does, when really that landscape is transforming as we're learning more about empathy and about talking about human experiences.
Right.
I think what is troubling for like the government when it comes to like beyond the political conflicts that are enduring right now that are blocking like um TikTok from staying in the US,
Right.
aside from all that, they the US government does not like the proliferation of ideas.
Yeah.
And when it comes to discussing mental health and discussing like, I mean, discussing mental health is radical. It's just any radical conversation is always going to be hushed, and that is frustrating.
Yeah, to say the least. I definitely can appreciate that. I've shared about it even before I knew I was bipolar. I've shared about like just my mental health issues publicly, and I've always gotten flack for doing it. But like the reason I do it is like I would have students come up and talk to me, like after class, mentioning it or something, and say like, how much they appreciated me talking about it and just knowing that there are adults who suffer with mental health issues too. And so like, I think that it's just, you know, tragic that we ignore it so much and just try to get people to not talk about it when like we would never do that with, people going through most like physical illnesses. So it's just frustrating to say the least. Yeah. So, but I'm curious what advice you would give to someone who's just been diagnosed with bipolar. Where would you say, hey, here's what you should do?
Find a content creator on your favorite platform. They're everywhere. YouTube, Discord, TikTok, I mean, Spotify, there's a wealth of podcasters. Find your favorite platform, research bipolar or type it into the keywords, the hashtags, the search bar, and just vibe. Hear someone else's story because the easiest thing to do when you're first diagnosed is to feel alone and to isolate yourself and to become depressed because most people are diagnosed when they're manic, like, or when they're coming out of mania,
Hmm.
just because those are very visible signs of bipolar.
Right.
But what always follows is depression, and it's very hard to face the reality of your manic and embarrassing and shameful stories when you don't have a good foundation in which to process it. And getting perspective from hearing that there's someone else out there that is enduring the same thing as you is the opposite of isolation. It's enveloping yourself in love. It's like providing a thermos for your like incubating your love for yourself. And it's interesting too because of course, like the first thing you should do is definitely align with your care team, so psychiatrist and therapist on your meds. The reason why I said look for someone on a platform that you can relate to is for your brain's health. Like it's to assuage any feelings of isolation. And it is to bring you out of this like funk of loneliness where you feel like no one else on the planet has ever endured something similar to this. And the fact of the matter is that there are people who have publicly had manic episodes and come back from it, and they're making billions of dollars. They're celebrities
Yeah.
that have bipolar, and they endure the paparazzi and everything and horrible tabloid media in the scope of their episodes, and they still come out unscathed or stronger than they were before. And I
Right.
think it's a testament to the strength in storytelling and the strength in seeking care because hearing from like these celebrities, of course they have the money to go to these fancy rehab facilities.
Right.
I think our like poor version of like a rehab facility is just listening to someone with a similar experience on your favorite platform.
Right. Absolutely. No, and well, that's what, so my hope and dream one day is to have a nudist retreat center that would, promote nudism, but also be like a cool refuge for people with bipolar who could go there and, learn how to make beer or infuse weed into food and, all that kind of make maple syrup or beekeeping, whatever. Bird watching, like these would be like the relaxing kinds of activities that would be way more fun than, spending $10,000 on a place down in Cincinnati to stay for 3 days on a 72-hour hold. So like that's kind of my thought, but I'm just willing it into existence and hoping one day it happens. But I before I let you go, where all can people find you, online or or wherever. And then also, I'm curious when's your book coming out? Are you gonna be putting all these stories into one?
Yes, definitely. So anyone can find me on TikTok at bipolar bitch. So just spelled bipolar bitch with E instead of the I for bitch. And it's you can find all of my links through that platform. I have a link tree that links to the bipolar Discord for bipolar bond book, my Instagram, my YouTube channel, email if you want to email me. So definitely navigate to TikTok and DM me, reach out. I'm always an open book, an open ear. And lastly, my book. I'm the most bipolar person ever, I swear. Like, I have started page by page, getting inch by inch through this damn book. I'm on page 45 of what is looking to be a 600-page book.
Wow,
And
that's awesome.
and I hope to finish it in this year, 2024, but no promises.
Awesome. Well, I have faith in you and good luck. I um it's yeah, I'm excited to read it when it comes out. So, but thanks so much for talking with me and being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, anytime, and thanks for having me, Arch.
Absolutely. All right, take care. And that was my interview with fellow bipolar creator Veronica, aka at Bipolar Batch on TikTok, and it was great talking with her. You can find her on Instagram as well, so be sure to give her a follow. Also, the big news since my last episode is that I now have a book out, and it's called One Dude's Guide to Being Bipolar: How to Stay the Hell Out of Grippy Sock's Jail, Achieve Anyways, and Abide Always. And if you're someone who suffers from bipolar disorder or knows someone who does, this book would be for you. So check out my website, gemcitydudistpriest.com/bipolar dude guide for more information on how to find the paperback, ebook, and newly released audiobook, which I recorded. So please be sure to leave a review wherever you read or listen to it. Thanks so much for listening and take care, everyone.